There's a piece of mathematics that carries a Russian letter around the world. Open a book on elliptic curves in Tokyo, in Sao Paulo, in Cambridge, and you'll find an object written with a Cyrillic letter. It's called Sh. The actual Russian letter, not the English spelling SH, sitting in an English equation like a comb with 3 teeth.
Mathematicians just import a Russian letter? Nobody swapped it for something typable?
Somebody tried. The early notation was TS. Then, in the 1960s, the British mathematician John Cassels replaced it with Sh, the first letter of Shafarevich's surname. The object is the Tate Shafarevich group. John Tate found it with Serge Lang in the late 50s. Shafarevich found it independently a year later, on the other side of the Iron Curtain. 2 discoveries, both names, and the letter is his.
A whole alphabet gate-crashing somebody else's equations.
He was one of the great mathematicians the Soviet Union produced, finished university at 17, a doctorate in his early 20s, founder of a Moscow school of algebraic geometry.
A real one, then. Not a hobbyist.
Absolutely first rank. And here's what I keep turning over. A proof has one property that defines it. Anyone can check it. Hand it to a stranger who despises you, and if it's sound, it survives him.
The argument doesn't care who's holding it.
So, somewhere around 1978, this man starts writing a different kind of proof. Not about curves, about a people. And he builds it, very deliberately, so that no stranger can ever check it.
That's a sinister sentence, Gregory.
It's a sinister book. And before I say anything else in that voice, hi, I'm Gregory.
And I'm Dina, which is a Gregory special. A charming story about a letter in a textbook, a tour of the man's brilliance, and then you look up, and it's very dark out.
I prefer to call it pacing.
Last time we spent an hour with Solzhenitsyn, the prophet on the train, handing down verdicts to a country that had stopped listening. Today, the man standing just behind him, one of his closest allies, and the author of the book that handed Russia a word it now uses at the United Nations.
The word is Russophobia. How it traveled, from a manuscript photocopied in somebody's kitchen to a UN Security Council chamber, is one of the strangest journeys in modern Russian thought. And the man at its center was brave, brilliant, and in the second half of one book, did something I don't think can be defended.
So start earlier.
To understand why this hurts, you have to see who he was before. Born 1923 in Zhytomyr in what's now Ukraine, raised in Moscow, in a room in a communal flat, in a cultured family that wasn't wealthy. His first love wasn't maths, but history. He said that never left him.
Which is either charming or the first clue, depending on where this goes.
Hold that thought. Then mathematics takes over, and by the late 1960s, something shifts. The passivity of thinking, he said, the muteness, had started to feel like irresponsibility.
That's a very quotable conscience.
He acts on it. The Committee on Human Rights in the USSR is founded in November 1970 by Andrei Sakharov and 2 others, Sakharov being the nuclear physicist turned dissident, 5 years off a Nobel Peace Prize. The next year, Shafarevich joins him on it.
So the 2 of them are on the same side.
Same table, same fight. He defends the Orthodox Church at press conferences and campaigns against punitive psychiatry, declaring dissidents insane and locking them up.
Because if your politics are a diagnosis, nobody has to answer your argument.
Exactly. In 1974, he contributes 3 essays to Solzhenitsyn's From Under the Rubble, the founding document of the national wing of dissent.
Slow down. For anyone who didn't grow up with this, the dissidents sounds like one brave crowd.
It's split. The liberal westernizing wing, Hero Sakharov, human rights, democracy, convergence with the West. The national wing, Hero Solzhenitsyn, Russia recovering its own tradition. While there's a common enemy, they're allies. The moment it dies, opponents.
The rebel alliance problem. Half of them want a republic, half want the old monarchy back. And it works beautifully right up until the moment they win. So where's Shafarevich standing when the common enemy is gone?
Not just in the national camp. It's heavy artillery. And it cost him his teaching. He's thrown out of Moscow University in 1975. What saved him from worse was fame. Arresting an academy member with an international reputation would have been an incident. The shield Sakharov had.
He's the real thing then. Not shouting from safety.
Not at all. And in 1977, an émigré press in Paris brings out his book on socialism, in English 3 years later as The Socialist Phenomenon, with a foreword by Solzhenitsyn. Socialism, he argues, isn't a modern economic idea, but an ancient impulse running from the Near East to Marx, and at bottom, a drive towards the death of individuality.
Not a small thesis, then.
He was not a small thesis man. And I came to this expecting a crank. He wasn't one. He read 3 or 4 languages and read widely in Western thought, which makes what comes next worse. Because around 1978, this man, first-rank mathematician, courageous dissident, one of Solzhenitsyn's closest allies, starts writing an essay about the people who, as he sees it, hate Russia.
All right. The book.
The essay is called Russophobia. Written roughly 1978 to 1982, circulated in Samizdat, self-publishing under a dictatorship, typed or photocopied and passed hand-to-hand at real risk. A few dozen copies.
How long does it stay underground?
Years. Then glasnost. Gorbachev's loosening of censorship from the mid-'80s, on the theory that the system could survive being discussed honestly. What it did was open the floodgates. In 1989, the essay appears at home, in Nash Savremennik, the flagship journal of Russian nationalism, and detonates.
So a manuscript that reached a few dozen people now reaches...
millions. Overnight. Written for the drawer, and published into a country that had just been handed the right to argue in public.
A private diary dropped into a country that's just discovered comment sections. No moderation, no antibodies. Did he coin the word himself?
No, and this matters. As a word, Russophobia is older and Western. British pamphleteers were using it in the 1830s about their own government's fear of Russia. The first known use in Russian is the poet and diplomat Fyodor Tyutchev in a letter of 1867. And he aims it not at foreigners, but at his own milieu. The Russophobia, he writes, of certain Russians, highly respected ones at that.
Hang on. So the West's word for its own fear of Russia becomes, in Russian, a word for Russians who don't love Russia enough?
That's the twist. And it's the shape of everything that follows. Tyutchev knew the external kind perfectly well. He'd spent the 1840s writing essays about Western hostility to Russia. But when he reaches for this word, it's for his own countrymen. People who, he says, once hated Russia for its lack of freedom, and whose aversion only grows the freer Russia gets, while they forgive Europe everything. Principles have nothing to do with it, he concludes. It's instinct.
The freer Russia gets, the more they hate it. As a theory of your own opponents that's wonderfully convenient, nothing they ever do can prove you wrong.
Remember that trick? We'll meet it again at full scale. Then the word dies, a curiosity for a century, and Shafarevich revives it and turns a complaint into a category, an ideology with a history, a structure, and a goal.
What's actually in it?
Hold on to this for the rest of the episode. The essay falls into 2 sections, and the first is legitimate polemic.
Define legitimate.
He summarizes a thesis he says he's been reading for years in émigré and dissident writing. Russians are a nation of slaves. No sense of personal worth. In love with cruel power. He quotes that literature's own phrase for it. the longing for a master. So 1917 wasn't an accident or an ideology. It was Russia being Russia, and Stalin, the logical end of Russian history.
Is he inventing that? Because I've read that argument in respectable places.
He isn't inventing it, and he goes after it hard, sometimes landing real punches. Against slavish obedience, he throws the great schism of the 17th century. The state changed some church rituals, and a huge part of the nation refused, fled into the forests by the thousand, went to torture and death, some burning themselves alive.
Not a nation of slaves, on that evidence.
Set it beside England, he says, where Henry VIII cut himself a new religion, recut it several times, and Parliament went along.
That's a good jab. What about the Oprichnina? That's the one everybody knows.
Ivan the Terrible's terror, 1565 to 1572. Shafarevich cites the historian Skrinnikov, who worked from the Synodicals, Ivan's own memorial lists of his victims, and put the figure at 3,000 to 4,000. Then he sets it against the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in France, almost the same decade, where more died in days.
He isn't defending Ivan, though.
Not defending, measuring. Then he turns it round. Imagine the history of France, told as nothing but Louis XI's executions, St. Bartholomew's, the persecution of Protestants under Louis XIV, the Revolutionary Terror. A hand-picked list of facts, he says, proves nothing about France or about anybody.
That's not a stupid argument. It's an argument you could have at a history seminar, and probably should have been had at one, calmly, decades earlier. Which is quietly part of the tragedy here. Nobody ever built the seminar room.
It is. He does the same with the empirical claims, catching Richard Pipes asserting that most of pre-Petrine Russia's service class couldn't read, and producing 19th century literacy counts that say otherwise. And his conclusion to that half is blunt. This is not a sincere attempt to understand history. It's propaganda, and it should be studied as propaganda. If the book stopped there, we wouldn't be here.
But it doesn't stop there.
It does not.
Take me to the second half.
Before the turn, one more step. Because he needs a villain, and goes to France to find one. The second part of the book is about what he calls plans for Russia. His opponents don't just despise Russian history, they have a program. Throw out your tradition, rebuild on the template of the Western democracies.
Is the objection that it won't work, or that it's insulting?
Both. But the charge is the insult. And his best material is borrowed from one opponent, the émigré historian Alexander Yanov, who suggests post-Soviet Russia might need a foreign-supervised brain trust on the MacArthur model.
I can see why that one stung.
And describing the Soviet official a reformed Russia would rest on, Yanov borrows a character from a satirical tale. A bureaucrat whose great dream is to bring home from America a stereophonic toilet. If the man wants a stereophonic toilet, he asks, is it plausible he wants a world war?
That's handing your opponent a loaded weapon.
Shafarevich picks it straight up. His version, a spiritual occupation, for now, by the Western intellectual community, resting on a layer of cosmopolitan managers kept generously supplied with stereophonic toilets.
So he isn't caricaturing them. He's quoting them.
Which is what makes it land. And his accusation fits in one sentence. These people treat my nation as raw material to be re-engineered by an enlightened few who feel no bond with it. Now he needs a name for them.
Enter the French.
Enter Augustin Cauchin. And this is where people get it wrong.